Hey, what's up? Welcome back to another episode of the Heroic Industries Podcast. And joining me in studio today, wait, listen to this. If you can hear that new little embed, it's not new. It's actually from one of my old shows. I forgot I had it. So I had this little embed that I thought was pretty sweet. Kind of sounds like a Zakk Wylde riff. So I put it on the background. So it'll play for another minute. Enjoy it. But joining me in the studio, aka my office, is Nicholas. So if you hear a crabby little 2-year-old, that's Nick. Just say hello to him and deal with it. He'll be okay. All right, he might sleep through this. Who knows? Okay, so this is the greatest show that we've ever done. This is definitely going to be a shorter show, but it's probably going to be the best show we've done to date. So get ready for it. Had a lot of stuff go on this weekend, and I actually did a CrossFit competition. I haven't done one of those in a long time, like a real one, like a real legit one. The Masters Fitness Collective. If you guys are not familiar with them, they're really gaining a lot of steam. They're really putting together a solid company that does a very good job with what they're doing, with putting on CrossFit competitions for old dudes and chicks. I think that's all they're. I think that's the only divisions they have are dudes and chicks. So far, we'll see how they develop. But it was really fun. It was really fun, and I learned a lot. And it's amazing being in this game for like 12 years now. How you can still learn more, going and doing and being around all the people that are in the space. And as much as I've had my ups and downs with how I felt about CrossFit, most of it related to my own injuries and my ability to compete and play and train or not. Man, it's a really cool space. It really is. There's a lot of downsides to it, just like anything. But there's way more of an upside to it. So anyway, so I went and did that competition. And let's go over it from a movement standpoint first. Nick's getting crabby. The movements. All right, so the movements. So here's basically I've been out of the game CrossFitting for, probably about a year. I haven't done a ton of CrossFit. It's always been similar, but I've let a lot of things go. Things that I've let go are Olympic movements and gymnastics. Stuff that I never really liked to do that much anyway, but I always did it because it was part of the CrossFit game. So I haven't done those pretty much at all. And here's what I learned. Olympic lifting goes away when you don't do it. It's not that your base of strength goes away. It's that the ability to handle the loads in those ranges of motion and in those shapes that Olympic lifting requires, right? It goes away if you don't practice it. And that means like front rack position. That means overhead squats. That means barbells overhead stabilizing under dynamic jumping and landing. Like that kind of stuff goes away. So those are important skills to have as a cop and as a human, right? I think that those are skills and positions that you need to be able to hit. You have to do it, right? Otherwise you have a hole in your game. Now, what that means is different for everybody. Just like we know that the needs of an Olympic athlete and the needs of our grandparents are the same, right? The same is true of your training, but you still got to do it, right? You can't just I just don't like this stuff, I'm not going to do it. Even if it's with an empty bar, you've got to be able to move dynamically, jump and catch, and get into a front rack position with your arms, and shoulders mobile enough to get there. A good front rack position. You've got to be able to get a bar overhead and not look like it hurts terribly bad. If you do that and you notice that in these positions, I can't get in a front rack. I can't do an overhead squat at all. Like that's where I was at, where I was doing so much of more bodybuilding style stuff where you don't do that. You don't do the front rack. You don't do the overhead position. You don't do anything that looks like an overhead squat. You really don't. And then when you go back to it, it is painful. And it shouldn't be painful, right? Making those shapes shouldn't be painful. So you lose mobility. You lose flexibility in certain ranges of motion. And that's an error, right? So Olympic lifting, like it or don't like it, you don't have to do it like you're competing for the damn Olympics or the CrossFit Games, but you got to be able to do it. You got to be able to make those shapes. You got to be able to get mobile, and you have to be able to do some semblance of jumping and catching under a load. And again, the load isn't relevant. That's not relevant. What is relevant is just the fact that you do it, right? That's it. Same's true of gymnastics. Gymnastics is something that, I just, to be honest, just never really liked. So I stopped doing it. And I decided years ago that, what's up, buddy? That, handstand walking is a trick that I really didn't care to do. It wouldn't be anything other than the CrossFit Games, and I'm just not going to learn it. So I was really exposed because it was in the competition. I couldn't do it, and I looked like a clown out there tripping on my hands for about 6.5 minutes or so, and couldn't do any, right? But is it important that you walk on your hands for quote unquote functionality? I don't know, probably not, but it is important that you continue to do stuff like crawl, that you get down on your hands and knees and you crawl around on your hands, putting weight through your upper body, pressuring down through the floor. Like, that's important, right? That's important for shoulder health. That's important for skills of just simply getting down to the floor and getting back up. That's why burpees are so important, right? They're not so important because they make you tired and sweaty and they make you want to vomit if you go fast, whatever. It's important that you understand how to move your body to the floor or the ground, roll around, crawl around, fall over, do a somersault, like do all these things where you're simply getting down to the floor or the ground, moving around and getting back up, right? Now, if you can do that more dynamically, more fluidly, if you can get up and walk on your hands, that's just a progression and an extension of a bear crawl, of a regular crawl, of simply getting down to the floor and standing back up without using your hands. It's just a progression, right? And now it's more of a top end progression. It's more of like a fancy little trick, if you will, for CrossFit and stuff like that, which is fine. It is what it is. But again, like, do you need to be able to walk on your hands? No, probably not. But what you do need to be able to do is understand why you need to do some gymnastics, why you need to be able to do a pull-up, a push-up, get down to and again, like, I can't stress this enough. Like, you have to, regardless of what your job is, what your career path is, like, you have to be able to simply get your ass from standing to the floor, flat on the ground, laying down, and then be able to stand back up. That seems very, very, very elementary, but just speaking as a cop, I've seen in in-service training where we can't train defensive tactics because there are a certain population in the room in every class that I've seen that can't do that. That can't get from standing to kneeling to laying, back to kneeling, back to standing with no external load other than usually a big fat gut. Okay? So these skills are directly transferable from a muscle up, a bar muscle up, a handstand push up, a handstand walk, freestanding handstand pirouette. Like, all these gymnastic drills are simply, again, just extensions of the base movement of taking your body through space. So if you let that go, that's a major, major error as well. And then additionally, your body's really good at adapting. So if you're looking at trying to, lose body fat, usually if you start to do more gymnastics training, your body will start to say, oh, I have to move my body through space. I'm hanging on bars. I'm pushing up off the ground. Maybe I don't need to hang on to this extra weight, And as long as you don't have serious hormonal disruptions and your food's semi in check and stuff like that, a lot of times we'll see people's body composition change based on the fact that they're doing more gymnastics and their body understands what it needs and what it doesn't need, right? It's pretty good at that, believe it or not. Believe it or regardless of what the government and big pharma want to say, right? Your body's pretty good at adapting to what it gets as a stimulus. Sicknesses, training stimulus, like all that kind of stuff. It's all designed, believe it or not, by something. Yeah, to do really well with that stuff, to adapt to training. And adapt to stress and adapt to environment and adapt to food and adapt to all of it, right? Your body adapts. Like, you will adapt. So anyway, that is the assessment of the movements, right? All the other stuff that I did, I had been working on kind of in some semblance, So it wasn't like a total shock to my system, but those were the big ones: the Olympic movements and the gymnastics. And that's it. So it basically, like, my movement assessment with that, for at least for my training, is that you can't omit stuff that you don't like to do just because you don't want to do it right now, right? Because it probably won't come back. You don't have to amplify it and just smash it like maybe you have been doing for, but you still have to do it. You still have to appreciate those components and utilize them for what they need to be for that tool at that time, And then if you want to get back into heavy Olympic weightlifting or add load to it, then you can decide to do that or not. But you got to have it in some capacity. Same with gymnastics, right? Same with gymnastics. All right. Okay. Next thing that I really want to talk about is very, very critical for this one is mindset with this. I knew, so I went out and I finished last, right? I typically don't do that where I enter a competition and then finish last, but totally did. Went out and I knew going into it that I was not going to do well. I am not conditioned to do CrossFit at this level. I am not in a place where, again, like I said, I haven't done Olympic weightlifting. I haven't done higher level gymnastics. I haven't practiced for it. And there was a swimming event, and I definitely didn't practice for that, like, at all. So, turns out, more skill sets that you don't just retain, you've got to practice them. And I was not in practice. But, with that said, you can't be afraid to get out and fail. You can't do it. And that's a major issue that I've seen for years with men specifically, but male law enforcement directly, is no dudes that, especially cops, want to go out and look like they suck. And you have to be open to going out and sucking. You just got to. You can't avoid that. And if you're avoidant to that, and if you're averse to looking like a clown once in a while, you're never going to get better. That ego is always going to protect you from being exposed, but at some point you're going to be exposed anyway. So you may as well have done it on purpose the way you want to do it under your terms, rather than when stakes are high, things matter, versus a CrossFit competition that really doesn't matter. So I had some things exposed to me this weekend that I was not ready for physically, and I failed. Right? I failed. So now it's up to me to go forward to put the holes, like fill in the holes, and then not fail again. And hopefully I can do that before something is on the line and I really need to have more gymnastics ability for whatever reason and I don't have it, right? So that's on me at this point. So I use this as a test. I knew I wasn't going to do well. I went out and failed, and now I need to get in the pool more and actually do some swimming so that I can fill in that failure point, right? So I don't fail when it counts in real life potentially, or in another competition down the road when I really want to test well, right? So you cannot be afraid to get out and fail. I tell that to my kids all the time too. If you're worried about failing all the time, it turns out you miss on some cool parts of life. Like, you got to get out there and just look like an ass sometimes. And just go do it and see what happens and throw caution in the wind and just be like, yeah, I'm not ready for this, but I'm going to go do it. There's no perfect time for anything. I'm just going to go do it. Fuck it. I got this. Or maybe you don't got this, but you're going to go out and see how it goes anyway. And you got to be bad at stuff before you can get good at stuff. And you also can't just sit in a room by yourself and just practice things and think that you're going to become a master at it without getting out and putting yourself out there in the public eye. It's not going to happen either. So, get out there and do it. Get out there and fail. Dan Devine, Mark Devine from SEAL Fit talks about that. Fail forward fast. So get out there and do it. Go screw some stuff up. It'll be all right, I promise. Right? To go along with that, not being afraid to get out and fail. But what you also have to look at is that you don't want to be afraid to win either. So a lot of times what we see is that we get to a point where it's like we're ready to do well, but you're not ready to win, and you're not ready to accept yourself as that winner, as that champion that you are, or that you could be, right? That you're prepared for, but you're not ready to accept yourself in that role. And there are stories playing in your mind every day, telling you things that are true sometimes and telling you things that are not true based on the history of your life and experiences and all kinds of stuff, right? And if you've got stories in your head from past experiences that are telling you that you're not a winner, that are telling you that you suck, that are telling you that you're a loser, that are telling you all these different things that may have been true at some point but aren't true now, and whatever, like, they're gonna keep playing in your head until you shut them up. And you have to put yourself in a seat to win before you even get out onto the competition floor, right? So winners go and they win before they even get in the arena. They win, right? And then from there, they decide how I need to win, right? But you have to make the conscious decision beforehand that you're going to win. You got that? Okay. So if you don't, it's gonna hinder you. It's gonna stop you. It's gonna be a limiting factor for you. You've got to give yourself permission to win, and then say, I already won. All right. Now I need to go back before the competition even happens, or before the thing, whatever that is, before that happens, and then decide how that win is going to happen, right? Football, right? We talked about this all the time. Like, you don't ever game plan for an opponent thinking that you're going to lose, right? So you go into every game with a plan to win. Now that plan may change, right? As you get punched in the mouth, everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the mouth, right? And then you adapt and overcome. This is no different. Any endeavor, anything that you take on, you have to win before you even start down the path. Because if you don't, you'll lose. You're planning to lose if you're not planning to win. Okay? That is 100% true 100% of the time. That's one of the very few things that is very clear. If you don't plan to win, like, you're planning to lose. That's it. So you've got to make that decision before you go down the path, and then you can rework it and reverse engineer it and figure out a game plan on how to accomplish the win, how to get that win. All right. So that leads us to the next point is, as far as my assessment of the weekend and what it taught me, right, is that planning and programming matter, right? It matters, as well as goal setting. So to go along with that win and that victory that you're already deciding that you're going to do, I already won, right? I already won. But you can't win if you don't set the goal, if you don't clearly define the parameters of what a win is, right? So with this competition that I did, when 4 or 6 weeks ago, whatever it was that I decided to do this, very short notice, I knew that a victory for me finishing first was going to be basically impossible based on the time frame that I had to prep for this. But a win for me was not the first place, right? A win for me was simply not getting last in every event and getting out there and doing it and just getting after some training and putting myself back in that space. Like, that was the big win, was putting myself back in the space. So set the goal, and then you reverse engineer planning and program design, and then find out what your time frame is and go through all of those SMART goals and all that kind of stuff that, we've talked about at length for years and years and years. But you got to rework some of this stuff. You got to work it backwards. It's not enough just to say, well, I'm going to do this stuff and I'm going to haphazardly, work on some things and try to train handstand walks every other day, and then I'll get better at those. Like, yeah, you might, but you probably won't win whatever it is you're going to set out to do because you didn't rework it strong enough and look at it closely enough. It's just not going to work out for you. So last thing is, as you are looking at your planning, your programming, your goal setting, your time frames, all that kind of stuff, you also got to look back at what you've done before. Like, say you've done this before, right? This goal, whatever it is. And know that you can't do everything the exact same way that you did before. You're not the same person today that you were last time you did this, or maybe you've never done this, right? So you can't do the same crap that you did before, even if it worked. So even if it worked, you're going to have to rework some stuff, and or you're going to have to find the things that you fell short on and make those better, right? So you can't just lean into all the stuff that you've done before. And you really have to examine what your patterns and your cycles are. Like, when do you give up on things? How do you start really hot, into a new endeavor, and you're all in, and you train 100 hours a day, and then next thing you know, in a week and a half, you're fried out, right? Or you're injured. Okay, I did a little bit of that. Or it's like, man, you think I would do things different, where I would not train the volume that that's always broken me in the past, and then all of a sudden I got Achilles tendonitis or something, right? So I started down that path. I didn't overdo it, but I knew when to back it off, and I changed some things, so I was able to compete in relatively one piece. But we all have to do the same things. You got to look at your patterns and your cycles. You got to look at your psychology and your behaviors and say, like, how do I typically do things? Where do I typically start to break down and fall apart? And how can I safeguard myself through this process without doing that again? Maybe that's hiring a coach. Maybe that's looking at nutrition more. Maybe that's looking at something other than the training. Maybe you got to look at your sleep. Maybe you got to look at your stress. Maybe you have to look at the other factors, and typically for most people that requires like hiring a coach or running off a program or getting a training partner or something like that. Maybe all of those things. So you got to examine your psychology and know how it's all worked for you in the past and how it's probably going to work for you in the future, because what do we know about human behavior? Our past basically predicts our future, and specifically, unless we examine things like this, it 100% will, right? You best predictor of future behavior is looking at past behavior, okay? And training's no different. What have you done in your training cycles and patterns in years and cycles past, right? Because they will start to come up again. They will start to come up again. How many people have you seen at the gym that are all in and then all out? And then I'm doing CrossFit, I'm going hard. There was one person I can specifically remember where it was like, oh yeah, this girl is all in. She's putting together about 2 weeks of training, and then next thing you know, it's Faygo and Skittles for breakfast again. So I guess she's out now. So it creates unreliable training. It creates it creates unreliable people, right? So usually the people that act like that in training also act like that in other parts of their lives, so they become unreliable, and you can really kind of figure those out relatively quickly. But if you want to change those aspects of you, you've got to examine your patterns and do something different. What's the standard definition of insanity, right? Doing the same thing over and over and over again and expecting a different result. That's not what you can do here, right? So, basically, if we reverse engineer this whole conversation, right, we go backwards. And then what this also does, what doing this also does, is it allows you to really control your environment a little bit more, and it gives you more power over the outcomes in your life. And especially at a time now when we look globally and we see these global issues, that it seems like, man, we were doing the same thing as a people, as a species, right? It's like we watch Afghanistan fall apart, and it's like, yeah, this looks very similar to what was that one war that Vietnam, right? It looks very similar to that. This COVID stuff, right? I don't even know if I can say that or if I'm gonna get banned from the 10 listeners that I have from this. This looks very similar to what? 100 years ago we had the Spanish flu, and it's like, man, we're doing the same stuff. We're doing the same stuff over and over again. We're wearing masks, and then, the elites get to have a separate set of rules than the regular people. And it's like, okay, this happened in what, 1919, and it's happening again in 2019, 2020, and 2021, right? So globally, from a world history standpoint, we are repeating patterns and cycles as a people, right? As a species. That's normal, but it's not good, right? But we can't change that. I can't change that. You know, that the world is going to do what the world is going to do, and I'm not going to be able to stop it, and you're not going to be able to stop it. But that doesn't mean that we can't change ourselves. And if enough of us change ourselves and examine our individual patterns and cycles and changes them for the better, whether that's in training, whether that's in finances, whether it doesn't matter, right? If we do that enough, and enough of us do it, and then we effectively create change in our own circles, that's how you create change. That's how you create control and power in your own individual cycles and processes, right? And that gives you and provides you, which really leads into a whole nother conversation, which I really didn't want to get into this a ton, but internal locus of control versus external locus of control. And that creates healthy mindsets, healthy frames of reference to live in. And then that creates results from all the shit that you want to get done. So that's that. That's my massive long assessment of the competition. And look at that. It went from movements all the way through creating, internal locus of control versus external, and how to create a healthy mindset and build your power and your control within your spheres of influence, right? Which is really the root of almost everything we do. The physical will follow the mental, right? And it's so easy to get wrapped up in the physical and say, well, I just got to do this, or I just got to change this. And it is, but at the same time, the mental aspect is something that you can always work on. You can always do one more mental rep. You can you get fatigued, but it's not going to break you, right? You're not going to have a psychotic break because you worked on goal setting just a little bit longer. Like, you're still going to get tired, but it's not like if you do one more squat that you might get hurt, right? You might get injured if you do too many reps, if you do too high a volume. With the mental game is nonstop, right? The nonstop, and you can really build a strong mind frame, which will then in turn provide you with these different results that you're looking for. So hopefully this stuff was helpful, and my podcast partner for the day was pretty legit. He was well behaved and a little groggy, and I'm gonna give him some food now. All right, guys, take care and live the road. See ya.